Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 1 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-400 Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 1. Question number 1. Scenario. A software vendor stores internally developed NuGet packages in a private Azure Artifacts feed. One package must be downloadable by users who do not have Microsoft Intra accounts or access to the Azure DevOps organization. The existing packages must remain private, and the package must continue to be distributed through Azure Artifacts. Which action should the DevOps engineer take? The available options are as follows. Option A. Promote the package to the release view of the existing feed. Option B. Create a separate public feed and publish the package to that feed. Option C. Replace the package feed URL with an anonymously accessible URL. Option D. Publish a second copy of the package to nuget.org. The correct answer is option B. Create a separate public feed and publish the package to that feed. Here's why. Package visibility is controlled at the feed and project level rather than for an individual package version. A separate public feed isolates the anonymously consumable package while the existing feed remains private and Azure Artifacts remains the publication service. Why are the other options not correct? A. A feed view promotes package quality but does not make a package anonymously accessible. C. Changing a URL does not alter feed permissions or package visibility. D. Publishing to nuget.org creates an additional publication service and does not retain Azure Artifacts as the sole distribution platform. Exam tip. Use feed views for package promotion and feed permissions or public feeds for package accessibility. Question number 2. Scenario. A global product team uses Azure DevOps to manage agile development. The team needs a collaboration platform that provides persistent project channels, supports guest participation, runs on Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android, and integrates with Azure DevOps notifications and work items. Which collaboration platform should the team adopt? The available options are as follows. Option A, Octopus Deploy. Option B, Slack. Option C, Bamboo. Option D, Skype for Business. The correct answer is option B, Slack. Here's why. Slack provides persistent channels, channel history, guest access, clients for all specified operating systems, and Azure DevOps integrations for development notifications and collaboration. Why are the other options not correct? A. Octopus Deploy is primarily a deployment automation platform rather than a team communication service. C. Bamboo is a continuous integration and build server, not a persistent multi-channel collaboration platform. D. Skype for Business does not provide the required modern project channel and Azure DevOps integration model. Exam tip. Select communication tools by evaluating channel isolation, message retention, guest access, supported clients, and DevOps integration. Question number 3. Scenario. An Azure pipeline compiles and tests a Java application. The pipeline must publish a code coverage report that Azure DevOps can process and display with the build results. Which coverage report format should the build produce? The available options are as follows. Option A, Coverlet. Option B, Cobertura. Option C, MSDist. Option D, Bullseye Coverage. The correct answer is option B, Cobertura. Here's why. Azure pipelines can publish Cobertura-compatible code coverage results, and Java coverage tools can generate reports in that format for display with pipeline results. Why are the other options not correct? A. Coverlet is primarily used to collect coverage for .NET applications. C. MSDist is a Microsoft test framework rather than a Java coverage report format. D. Bullseye coverage is primarily associated with native C and C++ coverage rather than the requested Java pipeline report format. Exam tip. Distinguish the test framework that executes tests from the report format consumed by the pipeline. Question number 4. Scenario. A classic Azure pipeline's release stage requires approval from an operations lead. The approval currently expires after 2 hours, but organizational policy allows approvers 8 hours to respond. An engineer proposes changing the time between reevaluation of gates setting in the post-deployment conditions to 8 hours. Does the proposed change ensure that the release fails only when the approval remains pending for more than 8 hours? The available options are as follows. Option A, yes. Option B, no. The correct answer is option B, no. Here's why. Time between reevaluation controls how often release gates are sampled. It does not extend the timeout for a pending manual approval. The approval timeout or applicable stage timeout must be changed to 8 hours. Why are the other options not correct? A. The proposal changes gate evaluation frequency rather than the period allowed for an approver to respond. Exam tip. In classic releases, distinguish approval timeouts from gate evaluation intervals and gate timeouts. Question number 5. Scenario. A manufacturing company hosts a Git repository on an on-premises Bitbucket server. The server cannot accept inbound connections from the internet. Azure pipelines will run manual and scheduled builds by retrieving source code from the server. Which two components should be configured? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select exactly 2 answers. The available options are as follows. Option A, an external Git service connection. Option B, Azure DevOps service hooks. Option C, a self-hosted Azure Pipelines agent with access to Bitbucket server. Option D, a Microsoft-hosted Azure Pipelines agent. Option E, an Azure Pipelines deployment group. The correct answers are Option A, an external Git service connection, and Option C, a self-hosted Azure Pipelines agent with access to Bitbucket server. Here's why. The external Git service connection supplies the repository endpoint and authentication information. A self-hosted agent inside the reachable network can initiate outbound communication to Azure DevOps while accessing the firewalled Bitbucket server locally. Why are the other options not correct? B. Service hooks send event notifications but do not provide repository authentication or build agent connectivity. D. A Microsoft-hosted agent cannot reach an on-premises server that is inaccessible from the public network. E. A deployment group targets deployment machines and is not the source retrieval mechanism for the build. Exam tip. For private or on-premises source systems, combine the appropriate repository service connection with a self-hosted agent that has network access. Question number 6. Scenario. A development team deploys an ASP.NET Core web application to an Azure App Service Premium plan. The team must deploy new releases to a staging environment, run automated integration tests, and then route production traffic to the new release without dropping existing client connections or incurring downtime. Which deployment feature should the DevOps engineer use? The available options are as follows. Option A, deployment slots. Option B, Azure Front Door. Option C, Application Gateway. Option D, Feature Flags. The correct answer is Option A, Deployment Slots. Here's why. Deployment slots are live apps with their own host names. A swap operation between a staging slot and the production slot warms up the target worker instances and redirects traffic seamlessly without dropping connections, enabling zero downtime deployments. Why are the other options not correct? B. Azure Front Door is a global load balancer. While it routes traffic, it does not provide native app service instance warm-up and swap capabilities. C. Application Gateway provides regional layer 7 load balancing, but is not the native app service zero downtime staging mechanism. D. Feature Flags toggle application features on or off in code. They do not manage underlying compute environments or zero downtime app deployments. Exam tip. Use deployment slots in Azure App Service for zero downtime deployments and pre-production validation in a live environment. Question number 7. Scenario. An Azure Pipelines YAML pipeline deploys a microservice to Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. The pipeline must retrieve a database connection string securely from an Azure Key Vault during the pipeline execution. The pipeline uses an Azure Resource Manager Workload Identity Federation Service connection. Which pipeline task should the DevOps engineer use to retrieve the secret? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Key Vault at 2. Option B, Download Secure File at 1. Option C, Azure App Configuration at 5. Option D, Kubernetes at 1. The correct answer is option A, Azure Key Vault at 2. Here's why. The Azure Key Vault at 2 task connects to Azure Key Vault using the provided Azure Resource Manager service connection and downloads secrets, mapping them to secure pipeline variables for use in subsequent tasks. Why are the other options not correct? B. Download secure file at 1 retrieves files uploaded to the Azure Pipeline Secure Files library, not secrets from Azure Key Vault. C. Azure App Configuration at 5 retrieves key value configuration data from Azure App Configuration, not directly from Key Vault. D. Kubernetes at 1 interacts with the Kubernetes API. It does not retrieve secrets from Azure Key Vault. Exam tip. Use the Azure Key Vault at 2 task to natively fetch Key Vault secrets and map them to masked pipeline variables. Question number 8. Scenario. A team builds an ASP.NET Core application by using the following multistage Docker file. Line numbers are included for reference. 01 from mcr.microsoft.com/.net/sdk:100 build 02 workter/src03 copy. 04 run.net publish. See release. O/out 05 from mcr.microsoft.com/.net/sdk:100 final 06 workter/app07 copy. From =build/out. 08 entrypont.net portal.dll. The final image must contain only the components needed to run the published web application. Which line should be modified? The available options are as follows. Option A, line 1. Option B, line 4. Option C, line 5. Option D, line 8. The correct answer is option C, line 5. Here's why. The final stage should use the smaller ASP.NET runtime image instead of the full .NET SDK image. The SDK is required to compile and publish the application, but is unnecessary at runtime. Why are the other options not correct? A. The build stage requires the SDK to compile and publish the application. B. The publish command is required to generate the deployable output. D. The entry point starts the application and does not determine whether SDK tooling is included. Exam tip. Use an SDK image for the build stage and the smallest compatible runtime image for the final stage. Question number 9. Scenario. A development team stores source code in GitHub and collaborates in Microsoft Teams. Every push to a repository must generate a notification in a designated Teams channel. The solution must require no custom integration code. What should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, an Azure function that pulls the GitHub REST API. Option B, an Azure automation runbook that calls the team's API. Option C, a custom GitHub Actions workflow that invokes Microsoft Graph. Option D, the GitHub app for Microsoft Teams with a repository subscription. The correct answer is option D, the GitHub app for Microsoft Teams with a repository subscription. Here's why. The GitHub app provides built-in Teams channel subscriptions for repository events such as pushes, avoiding custom code, and separately hosted integration components. Why are the other options not correct? A. An Azure function requires custom development, hosting, authentication, and maintenance. B. An automation runbook adds unnecessary polling or integration logic. C. A custom workflow and Microsoft Graph call require additional code and credential management. Exam tip. Prefer supported marketplace or first-party integrations when they satisfy the event and notification requirements without custom code. Question number 10. Scenario. An Azure board's dashboard must report how quickly work moves through an agile delivery process. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate metric. Statement 1. The elapsed time from creation of a work item until completion is measured by the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are cycle time, lead time, velocity, or burn down. Statement 2. The elapsed time from when active work begins until the work item is completed is measured by the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are lead time, cumulative flow, cycle time, or velocity. For statement 1, the correct selection is lead time. Lead time includes the waiting period before active work begins. For statement 2, the correct selection is cycle time. Cycle time starts when work enters an active state and ends at completion. Exam tip: lead time starts at request creation. Cycle time starts when implementation work begins. Question number 11. Scenario: a GitHub organization contains a repository used by an application team. 3 members require different levels of repository access. Match each team member with the least privileged GitHub repository role that satisfies the requirement. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, a developer who must clone the repository and push code changes. Source item 2, a coordinator who must manage issues and pull requests but must not push code. Source item 3, a repository steward who must manage the repository without deleting it or changing access to sensitive administrative settings. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, read. Destination B, maintain. Destination C, write. Destination D, admin. Destination E, triage. The first correct mapping is a developer who must clone the repository and push code changes. Map to C, write. The second correct mapping is a coordinator who must manage issues and pull requests, but must not push code. Map to E, triage. The third correct mapping is a repository steward who must manage the repository without deleting it or changing access to sensitive administrative settings. Map to B, maintain. Here's why. Write permits code pushes, triage permits issue and pull request management without write access, and maintain supports repository management while excluding sensitive or destructive administrative capabilities. Exam tip: use triage for issue and pull request coordination, write for contributors, maintain for non-sensitive management, and admin for full control. Question number 12. Scenario: a repository named Orders was migrated from GitHub to Azure repos. Developers continued committing to the original GitHub repository after the migration. A DevOps engineer will create a bare clone of the Azure repos destination, add the original GitHub repository as an upstream mirror, fetch the new commits, and push them to Azure repos. The remaining commands will be git fetch upstream, tags git push origin, all. Match each value with the correct placeholder in the synchronization script. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, the Azure repos clone URL for the orders repository. Source item 2, the local bare repository directory orders.git. Source item 3, the original GitHub repository URL for the orders repository. Source item 4, the Azure repos browser URL for the project. Source item 5, the local working tree directory orders. Source item 6, the GitHub organization homepage URL. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, git clone, bare value. Destination B, CD value. Destination C, git remote add, mirror equals fetch upstream, value. The first correct mapping is the Azure repos clone URL for the orders repository, mapped to A, git clone, bare value. The second correct mapping is the local bare repository directory orders.git, mapped to B, CD value. The third correct mapping is the original GitHub repository URL for the orders repository, mapped to C, git remote add, mirror equals fetch upstream, value. Here's why. The destination repository must remain the origin so fetch changes can be pushed to Azure repos. The original repository is added as the upstream fetch source from which post-migration commits and tags are retrieved. Exam tip: when synchronizing after a migration, clone the destination as origin and configure the former repository as the upstream fetch remote. Question number 13. Scenario: 5 Azure virtual machines must authenticate to a shared internal service by using the same Microsoft intro identity. Azure must manage the identity credentials automatically, and administrators must be able to assign Azure roles to the identity independently of the virtual machines. Which identity type should be used? The available options are as follows. Option A, a user-assigned managed identity. Option B, a system-assigned managed identity. Option C, a Microsoft Entra user account. Option D, a service principal with a client secret. The correct answer is option A, a user-assigned managed identity. Here's why. A user-assigned managed identity is an independent Azure resource that can be associated with multiple virtual machines and receive role assignments. Azure manages its credentials automatically. Why are the other options not correct? B. A system-assigned identity is tied to one resource and cannot be shared as one identity across all virtual machines. C. A user account is human-oriented and requires separate credential and lifecycle management. D. A service principal with a client secret introduces a long-lived credential that must be stored and rotated. Exam tip. Use a user-assigned managed identity when multiple Azure resources must share one Azure managed identity. Question number 14. Scenario. A developer pushes a commit to a public GitHub repository. The commit contains a token that matches a secret scanning partner pattern registered by the token issuer. Which party receives the potential secret alert for validation and possible revocation? The available options are as follows. Option A, the repository committer. Option B, the repository owner. Option C, the secret provider participating in the partner program. Option D, the GitHub organization administrator. The correct answer is option C, the secret provider participating in the partner program. Here's why. For supported partner patterns detected in public repositories, GitHub reports the potential credential to the participating secret provider so the provider can validate and revoke it when necessary. Why are the other options not correct? A. The committer is not the primary recipient of a partner alert sent for provider validation. B. The repository owner is not the first destination for the partner program notification. D. Organization administrators are not the external secret validation endpoint. Exam tip. Partner secret scanning sends supported public repository findings to the credential provider for verification and remediation. Question number 15. Scenario. Two Azure pipelines build different applications on the same Windows self-hosted agent. Each application requires a conflicting version of a build dependency. The organization wants to isolate the tool chains without purchasing another virtual machine. What should the DevOps engineer configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, a second permanent self-hosted agent. Option B, a Docker-composed deployment task in each pipeline. Option C, a replacement agent that runs Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Option D, a separate container job for each build pipeline. The correct answer is option D, a separate container job for each build pipeline. Here's why. Container jobs provide isolated file systems and dependency sets while allowing both builds to use the same underlying self-hosted agent. Each application can use a container image containing its required tool versions. Why are the other options not correct? A. A second agent would provide isolation but increases infrastructure cost. B. Docker-composed deployment tasks do not automatically isolate the complete build job environment. C. Changing the host operating system does not resolve conflicting dependencies and may introduce incompatibilities. Exam tip. Use container jobs to isolate pipeline dependencies without provisioning a separate agent for each toolchain. Question number 16. Scenario. An application sends processor performance counters to application insights. A DevOps engineer must graph the average processor usage for each application instance in hourly intervals over the last 24 hours. The graph must also display a constant threshold of 75. The query contains the following placeholders. Performance counters where time generated ago, 1D, where counter equals percent processor time, summarize average CPU equals average, value, by cloud_instance, value threshold equals 75 render time chart. Match each KQL element with the appropriate placeholder. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, bin, time generated 1D. Source item 2, project. Source item 3, extend. Source item 4, bin, time generated 1H. Source item 5, render. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, the time grouping expression in the summarize operator. Destination B, the operator that creates the threshold column. The first correct mapping is bin, time generated, 1H, mapped to A. the time grouping expression in the summarize operator. The second correct mapping is extend, map to be, the operator that creates the threshold column. Here's why. Bin, time generated, 1h, groups records into hourly intervals. The extend operator adds a calculated threshold column with a constant value 75, allowing the time chart to display the threshold series. Exam tip. Use bin for time aggregation and extend for calculated columns that should appear as additional chart series. Question number 17. Scenario. An ASP.NET Core application is deployed through Azure pipelines. Application Insights has been provisioned, and the application must receive its Application Insights connection string through the standard runtime configuration system. Which project file should contain the corresponding configuration setting? The available options are as follows. Option A, launchsettings.json. Option B, appsettings.json. Option C, project.json. Option D, startup.cs. The correct answer is option B, appsettings.json. Here's why. ASP.NET Core reads runtime application settings, including the Application Insights connection string, through its standard configuration system, for which appsettings.json is a conventional configuration source. Why are the other options not correct? A. Launchsettings.json primarily controls local development launch profiles. C. Project.json is an obsolete project definition format and is not the runtime configuration file. D. Startup.cs can register services, but should not contain the environment-specific connection string value. Exam tip. Keep environment-specific telemetry settings in configuration providers rather than hard-coding them in application startup code. Question number 18. Scenario. Azure Monitor Logs contains performance data for a virtual machine named API VM1. A query must display the average available memory for each hour during the previous 7 days as a time chart. Complete the KQL query by selecting the appropriate expressions. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. The query must filter records by using where the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are time generated equals ago 7D, time generated ago 7D, or time generated ago 7D. Statement 2. The summarize operator must group the average counter value by the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are bin, time generated 1D, count, counter name, or bin, time generated 1H. For Statement 1, the correct selection is time generated ago 7D. This selects records newer than the timestamp 7 days ago. For Statement 2, the correct selection is bin, time generated 1H. This creates one aggregation bucket for each hour. Exam tip. Filter rolling windows with time generated ago, duration, and use bin to control time series aggregation granularity. Question number 19. Scenario. A GitHub repository is connected to Azure Boards. A developer is committing a change related to Azure Boards work item 842 and wants the commit to be linked to that work item automatically. Which reference should be included in the commit message? The available options are as follows. Option A, at 842. Option B, number 842. Option C, AB number 842. Option D, the complete Azure Boards work item URL. The correct answer is option C, AB number 842. Here's why. The AB hashtag work item reference syntax is recognized by the Azure Boards integration for GitHub and automatically creates traceability between the commit and the specified work item. Why are the other options not correct? A. The @ syntax identifies GitHub users or teams rather than Azure Boards work items. B. A bare number sign references GitHub issues or pull requests in the GitHub repository context. D. A full URL can be readable, but does not use the dedicated Azure Boards integration syntax. Exam tip. Use AB hashtag followed by the work item ID to link GitHub commits and pull requests to Azure Boards. Question number 20. Scenario. A GitHub repository is integrated with Azure Boards. A pull request must be linked to work items 901, 902, and 903. When the pull request is merged, Only work item 901 must transition to the completed state. Which text should be included in the pull request description or associated commit message? The available options are as follows. Option A, AB number 901, AB number 902, AB number 903. Option B, fixes number 901, number 902, number 903. Option C, fixes AB number 901, AB number 902, AB number 903. Option D, fixes AB number 901, fixes AB number 902, fixes AB number 903. The correct answer is option C, fixes AB number 901, AB number 902, AB number 903. Here's why. The AB hashtag references link all three Azure Boards work items. The transition keyword applies to the first referenced work item, so work item 901 is completed while work items 902 and 903 remain linked without being transitioned. Why are the other options not correct? A. This links the work items, but does not request a state transition for work item 901. B. The references omit the AB prefix and can be interpreted as GitHub issue references. D. Repeating the transition keyword requests completion of all three work items. Exam tip. Repeat the transition keyword before each AB hashtag reference only when every referenced work item should change state. Question number 21. Scenario. A delivery manager is creating an Azure Boards dashboard. The manager needs to measure the elapsed time between a work item entering an active state and reaching a completed state. Which dashboard widget should be used? The available options are as follows. Option A, lead time. Option B, cycle time. Option C, velocity. Option D, cumulative flow diagram. The correct answer is option B, cycle time. Here's why. Cycle time measures how long a work item remains in active workflow states, beginning when work starts and ending when the item is completed. Why are the other options not correct? A. Lead time begins when the request or work item is created, including time before active work starts. C. Velocity measures the amount of work completed during iterations. D. A cumulative flow diagram visualizes work item counts across workflow states and bottlenecks rather than directly reporting the requested duration. Exam tip. Use cycle time for active work duration and lead time for total request to completion duration. Question number 22. Scenario. An Azure pipeline deploys an application that authenticates to Azure SQL database by using a password. The password will be stored in an Azure Key Vault configured to use the Vault Access Policy Permission model. The pipeline service principal must be permitted to retrieve the value. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate configuration. Statement 1. The database password should be stored in the Key Vault as of the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are key, secret, or certificate. Statement 2. Permission for the pipeline service principal should be granted by modifying the Key Vault the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are access policies, networking settings, or access control, IAM. For Statement 1, the correct selection is secret. Key Vault secrets are intended for passwords, tokens, and connection string values. For Statement 2, the correct selection is access policies. The scenario specifies the Vault Access Policy Permission model. Exam tip. Store passwords as secrets and match authorization configuration to the vault selected are BAC or Access Policy Permission model. Question number 23. Scenario. A GitHub repository contains several actions workflows. A credential is currently defined as an environment secret, but every workflow in the repository must be able to use the credential without being associated with that environment. What should the repository administrator do first? The available options are as follows. Option A. Recreate the credential as a repository secret. Option B. Recreate the credential as an organization secret without a repository policy. Option C. Add required reviewers to the environment. Option D. Convert the credential to an actions variable. The correct answer is Option A. Recreate the credential as a repository secret. Here's why. Repository secrets are available to eligible workflows throughout the repository, whereas environment secrets are available only to jobs that reference the associated environment and satisfy its protection rules. Why are the other options not correct? B. An organization secret without an access policy is not automatically available to every repository and is broader than required. C. Required reviewers further restrict use of the environment secret rather than making it repository-wide. D. Actions variables do not provide the protected handling required for a credential. Exam tip. Choose secret scope deliberately. Environment for deployment boundaries, repository for one repository, and organization for approved multiple repositories. Question number 24. Scenario. A developer must use Scalar to clone an Azure repo's monorepository named Web Platform. Company policy requires HTTPS authentication and prohibits SSH. Only the src/web directory should be materialized in the working tree. The commands will be run from the c:\repos directory. Match each value with the correct placeholder. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. https://dev.azure.com/adatum/store_git/web platform. Source item 2. Git at ssh.dev.azure.com. v3/adatum/store/web platform. Source item 3. Web platform/src. Source item 4. src/web. Source item 5. Web platform/web. Source item 6. Web. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, Scalar clone value. Destination B, CD value. Destination C, Git sparse checkout set value. The first correct mapping is https://dev.azure.com/adatum/store/git/web-platform mapped to A, Scalar clone value. The second correct mapping is web platform/src mapped to B, CD value. The third correct mapping is src/web mapped to C, Git sparse checkout set value. Here's why. The HTTPS URL satisfies the authentication constraint. Scalar creates the repository enlistment with the working tree under the repository's src directory, and Git sparse checkout set accepts the repository relative directory path to materialize. Exam tip. After a Scalar clone, run working tree git commands from the generated src directory and use repository relative sparse checkout paths. Question number 25. Scenario. A repository team requires a locally stored PowerShell validation script to run automatically before a developer starts a Git rebase. The script must be invoked by Git on the developer workstation. Which mechanism should be configured? The available options are as follows. Option A, a repository_dispatch webhook. Option B, a pre-rebase Git hook. Option C, a GitHub package. Option D, a GitHub gist. The correct answer is option B, a pre-rebase Git hook. Here's why. Git invokes the pre-rebase hook locally before a rebase begins. The hook can call the PowerShell validation script and return a non-zero status to stop the operation. Why are the other options not correct? A, a repository_dispatch webhook is a remote GitHub event and is not automatically invoked before a local Git rebase. C, a package distributes software but does not register a pre-rebase execution point. D, a gist stores text or scripts but does not cause Git to execute them. Exam tip. Use Git hooks for client-side actions tied directly to local Git operations. Use webhooks for server-side repository events. Question number 26. Scenario. An Azure repos branch is protected by pull requests. Before a pull request can be merged and its validation build can be accepted, every active review comment must be resolved. The control should be enforced without developing custom automation. What should be configured? The available options are as follows. Option A, a post-deployment gate. Option B, a custom Azure Pipelines task. Option C, a branch policy that checks for comment resolution. Option D, a pre-deployment gate. The correct answer is option C, a branch policy that checks for comment resolution. Here's why. The comment resolution branch policy prevents pull request completion while active comments remain unresolved and requires no custom pipeline implementation. Why are the other options not correct? A post-deployment gate runs after deployment and cannot enforce pull request completion requirements. B. A custom task would introduce unnecessary development and maintenance effort. D. A pre-deployment gate controls a release environment rather than repository pull request governance. Exam tip. Use branch policies for merge time controls such as reviewers, build validation, linked work items, and comment resolution. Question number 27. Scenario. A legacy Azure Pipelines Classic release must generate a Markdown release notes file containing newly completed features and resolved bugs. A service account will authenticate to the Azure DevOps REST API by using a least-scoped personal access token. The token must be available before a saved Azure Boards query is validated through the API. After validation, the query identifier will be used by a PowerShell task in the release. Select and arrange the 3 required actions in the correct order. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Add a PowerShell task to the release pipeline that retrieves the query results and writes them to a Markdown file. Item 2. Add an Azure DevOps dashboard widget that displays the feature and bug information. Item 3. Create a saved Azure Boards query that returns the required features and bugs and validate it through the REST API. Item 4. Create a least-scoped personal access token for the service account. Item 5. Create an Azure Service Principal for the release pipeline. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create a least-scoped personal access token for the service account. Second, create a saved Azure Boards query that returns the required features and bugs and validate it through the REST API. Third, add a PowerShell task to the release pipeline that retrieves the query results and writes them to a Markdown file. Here's why. The service account must first obtain an authentication token. The token is then used to validate the saved query through the API. After the query identifier and authentication mechanism are available, the release task can retrieve the data and generate the Markdown file. Exam tip. Provision authentication and query dependencies before adding automation that consumes them. Question number 28. Scenario. A DevOps engineer is authoring a Bicep module that deploys a general-purpose V2 storage account and requires secure transfer. The resource declaration contains the following incomplete structure. Resource Archive Store, Microsoft, storage/storage accounts at 2025-01-01 equals name, archive store name location, resource group, .location SKU, name, standard_JRS, select, storage v2 select, supports HTTPS traffic only, true. Select the property name that completes each placeholder. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. The property whose value is storage v2 must be the blank. The choices for statement 1 are type, kind, or SKU. Statement 2. The object containing supports HTTPS traffic only must be the blank. The choices for statement 2 are identity, properties, or parameters. For statement 1, the correct selection is kind. Storage v2 identifies the storage account resource kind. For statement 2, the correct selection is properties. Service-specific configuration values are placed in the resource properties object. Exam tip. In Bicep resources, top-level metadata such as kind is separate from service-specific settings under properties. Question number 29. Scenario. A developer accidentally deletes a local branch named feature/audit. The branch contained a commit that is not referenced by any remaining branch. The commit is still available in the local repository reflog. The developer must locate the commit, inspect it by checking it out in a detached state, and recreate the branch at that commit. Select and arrange the 3 required commands in the correct order. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Git branch feature/audit. Item 2. Git restore recovered SHA. Item 3. Git reflog. Item 4. Git stash. Item 5. Git switch. Detach recovered SHA. The correct sequence is as follows. First, git reflog. Second, git switch. detach recovered SHA. Third, git branch feature/audit. Here's why. The ref log identifies the commit previously referenced by the deleted branch. Switching to that SHA verifies and positions head at the recovered commit. Creating the branch while head points to that commit restores the branch reference. Exam tip. Use reflog to recover recently lost local references, then create a new branch at the recovered commit. Question number 30. Scenario. A container package follows semantic versioning. Its current released version is 7.4.0. The development team fixes a defect without introducing new functionality or making an incompatible API change. Which version should be assigned to the corrected release? The available options are as follows. Option A, 7.5.0. Option B, 8.0.0. Option C, 7.4.0 fix. Option D, 7.4.1. The correct answer is option D, 7.4.1. Here's why. A backward-compatible defect correction increments the patch component while leaving the major and minor components unchanged. Why are the other options not correct? A. Incrementing the minor component indicates backward-compatible new functionality. B. Incrementing the major component indicates an incompatible API change. C. An arbitrary fixed suffix does not represent the normal stable semver patch increment. Exam tip. In major.minor.patch, increment patch for compatible fixes, minor for compatible features, and major for breaking changes. Question number 31. Scenario. A manufacturing company uses Azure boards for work tracking and GitHub.com for source control. The DevOps team must establish the repository connection by using a supported user-bound authentication method. Which two authentication methods can be used to establish the connection? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Select exactly two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. Authenticate by signing in with a GitHub.com user account. Option B. Authenticate by using a GitHub Personal Access Token, PAT. Option C. Present a publisher signing certificate issued to the Azure DevOps organization. Option D. Use a Microsoft Intra-Access Token issued for Azure Resource Manager. Option E. Install a trusted root certificate on every Azure board's user device. The correct answers are Option A. Authenticate by signing in with a GitHub.com user account, and Option B. Authenticate by using a GitHub Personal Access Token, PAT. Here's why. Azure boards can connect to GitHub.com by using a GitHub.com user account or a GitHub Personal Access Token with the required repository permissions. Why are the other options not correct? C. A publisher certificate signs software. It is not a GitHub repository authentication method for this integration. D. An Azure Resource Manager token authorizes Azure resource operations, not access to GitHub repositories. E. A trusted root certificate establishes certificate trust, but does not authenticate Azure boards to GitHub. Exam tip. Distinguish repository authentication credentials from certificates used only for transport or software trust. Question number 32. Scenario. A retail API is hosted in Azure App Service and released through a multi-stage Azure pipeline. Operations must validate each release in a warmed environment, switch production traffic with almost no interruption, and restore the preceding release rapidly if health checks fail. Which deployment design should the team implement? The available options are as follows. Option A. Use one app service app with production and staging deployment slots. Option B. Use one app service app and maintain two independent YAML pipeline definitions. Option C. Deploy two app service apps behind an Azure standard load balancer. Option D. Deploy two app service apps and route users through Azure Traffic Manager. The correct answer is Option A. Use one app service app with production and staging deployment slots. Here's why. Deployment slots allow the new version to be warmed and validated before a slot swap. A swap changes the production slot with minimal downtime, and swapping back provides a fast rollback. Why are the other options not correct? B. Two pipelines do not create isolated runtime environments or provide traffic cutover and rollback. C. A load balancer design requires two separately managed apps and more deployment coordination than slots. D. Traffic Manager is DNS-based and does not provide the fastest deterministic rollback for two versions of one app service app. Exam tip: 4 app service releases requiring warm-up, near-zero downtime, and rapid rollback. Use slots and swap them. Question number 33. Scenario: a software vendor supports release line 5.2 while version 6.0.0 is already generally available. The latest build on the maintained 5.2 branch is 5.2.9. A defect introduced in version 5.2.4 must be fixed for customers who remain on that release line. Which version should be assigned to the hotfix package? The available options are as follows. Option A, 6.0.1. Option B, 5.3.0. Option C, May 2nd, 10. Option D, 5.2.5. The correct answer is option C, May 2nd, 10. Here's why. The change is a backward-compatible bug fix on the maintained 5.2 line, so the patch component must be incremented from that line's latest published version, 5.2.9, to May 2nd, 10. Why are the other options not correct? A. 6.0.1 would patch the current 6.0 line rather than the maintained 5.2 line. B. 5.3.0 indicates a backward-compatible feature release, not a bug fix release. D. 5.2.5 is lower than already released versions on the 5.2 line and cannot identify the new hotfix. Exam tip: for a hotfix on an older supported branch, increment the patch number from the highest version already released on that branch. Question number 34. Scenario: a delivery team must add automated end-to-end tests for a browser-based customer portal. The tests must exercise Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit in the CI pipeline. Which framework should the team select? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Code Analysis. Option B, Playwright. Option C, Jacoco. Option D, Xamarin.uitist. The correct answer is option B, Playwright. Here's why. Playwright is designed for reliable end-to-end automation of modern web applications across Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit and can run in CI pipelines. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Code Analysis provides compiler and code analysis APIs rather than browser UI automation. C. Jacoco measures Java code coverage and does not automate browser interactions. D. Xamarin.uitist targets mobile application UI testing rather than cross-browser web testing. Exam tip: choose a testing tool by the test surface, Playwright for web UI, coverage tools for coverage, and mobile frameworks for mobile apps. Question number 35. Scenario: an Azure Artifacts feed contains package Contoso, logging versions 1.2.0 and 1.5.0 published directly to the feed. Version 2.0.0 is discoverable from an upstream source, and version 2.4.0 has already been saved into the feed from that upstream source. A build restores the highest version available in the feed's local view that satisfies a dependency range of 1.0.0 or later. Which package version will the build restore? The available options are as follows. Option A, 1.2.0. Option B, 2.4.0. Option C, 2.0.0. Option D, 1.5.0. The correct answer is option B, 2.4.0. Here's why. Version 2.4.0 is already saved in the feed and is the highest version available in the local view that satisfies the stated range. Why are the other options not correct? A. 1.2.0 satisfies the range, but is not the highest available version. C. 2.0.0 is only discoverable from the upstream source and is lower than the already saved 2.4.0 version. D. 1.5.0 is locally published, but is lower than 2.4.0. Exam tip: package selection requires both feed visibility and the dependency version rule. Upstream status alone does not select a version. Question number 36. Scenario: a design studio has an Azure repos repository whose history contains many large TIFF files. The team wants Git LFS to track future TIFF files, and also migrate every existing TIFF object in all branches and tags before updating the remote repository. Complete the command sequence. Select the correct command for each blank. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. After running git lfs install, run the blank to add the TIFF pattern to .git attributes. The choices for Statement 1 are 1. Git lfs track star.tiff, git lfs update, or git fetch. Statement 2. After committing .git attributes, run the blank to rewrite existing TIFF objects into git lfs across all refs. The choices for Statement 2 are 2. Git lfs migrate import, include equals star.tiff, everything, git lfs config add star.tiff, or git worktree add, everything. Statement 3. After validating the rewritten history, run the blank to update the remote repository. The choices for Statement 3 are 3. Git push, force, all and git push, force, tags, git fetch, all, or git lfs update. For Statement 1, the correct selection is git lfs track star.tiff. The track command writes the pattern to .git attributes. For Statement 2, the correct selection is git lfs migrate import, include equals star.tiff, everything. The migrate import command rewrites matching objects throughout all reachable history. For Statement 3, the correct selection is git push, force, all and git push, force, tags. History rewriting changes commit IDs, so the rewritten branches and tags must be force-pushed after team coordination. Exam tip. A git lfs history migration rewrites commits. Coordinate the force push and require collaborators to reclone or repair their local histories. Question number 37. Scenario. An engineering organization authenticates Azure DevOps users through Microsoft Entra ID. Access must be allowed only when a user connects from the corporate network's trusted public IP ranges. What should the identity team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A. A Microsoft Entra conditional access policy that uses a named location. Option B. Azure DevOps project-level repository permissions. Option C. The stakeholder access level for every user. Option D. Microsoft Entra risky sign-in remediation only. The correct answer is Option A. A Microsoft Entra conditional access policy that uses a named location. Here's why. A conditional access policy can evaluate the source network through named locations and block Azure DevOps access when the sign-in originates outside the trusted corporate ranges. Why are the other options not correct? B. Project permissions control actions after access is granted. They do not enforce the user's network location. C. Stakeholder is an Azure DevOps licensing/access level and does not restrict sign-in location. D. Risky sign-in policies evaluate sign-in risk, not a requirement to allow only a specific network. Exam tip. Use conditional access for identity context restrictions such as network location, device state, and sign-in risk. Question number 38. Scenario. A bank deploys applications through an Azure DevOps release pipeline and manages production changes in ServiceNow. No production deployment may begin until ServiceNow confirms that the associated change request is approved. Which two implementations can enforce the requirement? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Select exactly two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. Configure a pre-deployment ServiceNow change management gate for the production stage. Option B. Add a post-deployment gate after the production deployment completes. Option C. Create a pre-deployment gate that invokes the ServiceNow REST API and succeeds only for an approved change. Option D. Invoke a ServiceNow SOAP endpoint from a post-deployment notification step. The correct answers are Option A. Configure a pre-deployment ServiceNow change management gate for the production stage, and Option C. Create a pre-deployment gate that invokes the ServiceNow REST API and succeeds only for an approved change. Here's why. A native ServiceNow change management gate or a custom pre-deployment REST API gate can both block the production stage until the change is approved. Why are the other options not correct? B. A post-deployment gate runs after production deployment has already occurred. D. A post-deployment notification cannot prevent the deployment, regardless of the protocol used. Exam tip. A control that must prevent production deployment belongs before the deployment and must fail or remain pending until approval is verified. Question number 39. Scenario. A GitHub repository stores reusable actions under .github/actions. The security engineering team must automatically be requested as reviewer whenever those action definitions are modified, and branch protection requires code owner approval. Where should the repository's code owner's file be placed? The available options are as follows. Option A, Git/. Option B, GitHub/workflows/. Option C, GitHub/. Option D, GitHub/actions/. The correct answer is option C, GitHub/. Here's why. GitHub discovers a code owner's file from supported locations that include the .github directory. The file can then contain a pattern for .github/actions/. Why are the other options not correct? A. .git is local repository metadata and is not a tracked code owner's location. B. .github/workflows is not one of the supported code owner's file locations. D. The owned path can be listed in code owners, but placing the code owner's file inside that subdirectory is not a supported discovery location. Exam tip. Put code owners in .github, the repository root, or docs, and use patterns inside it to assign ownership to paths. Question number 40. Scenario. A GitHub repository is connected to Azure boards. A commit must link work items 731, 732, and 733 to the resulting pull request. Only work item 731 must transition according to the configured commit mention workflow. Which commit message text should the developer use? The available options are as follows. Option A, AB number 731, AB number 732, AB number 733. Option B, fixes number 731, number 732, number 733. Option C, fixes AB number 731, AB number 732, AB number 733. Option D, fixes AB number 731, fixes AB number 732, fixes AB number 733. The correct answer is option C, fixes AB number 731, AB number 732, AB number 733. Here's why. AB number 731, AB number 732, and AB number 733 create links to all three Azure boards work items. The action keyword applies to the first referenced work item, so work item 731 is transitioned while the others remain linked. Why are the other options not correct? A. The references link the work items but contain no action keyword to transition work item 731. B. The missing AB prefix refers to GitHub issue syntax rather than Azure boards work items. D. Repeating the action keyword would request transitions for all three work items, not only work item 731. Exam tip. Use AB #ID to link Azure boards items from GitHub and place an action keyword only before the item that should transition. Question number 41. Scenario. A monorepo is several hundred gigabytes because historical commits contain many large file blobs. A developer must retain complete commit and tree history so that Git log and path history searches work, but downloading blob contents that are not checked out should be deferred. Which clone command best meets the requirement? The available options are as follows. Option A, git clone. Depth equals 1 repo_URL. Option B, git clone. Filter equals blob. None repo_URL. Option C, git clone. Filter equals tree, 0 repo_URL. Option D, git clone repo_URL. The correct answer is option B, git clone. Filter equals blob. None repo_URL. Here's why. A blobless partial clone downloads commit and tree objects while deferring file blobs until needed, preserving searchable history and reducing initial transfer. Why are the other options not correct? A. A shallow clone omits most commit history, so historical path searches are incomplete. C. A treeless clone also defers tree objects, which is less suitable when path history operations are required. D. A full clone downloads all reachable objects and does not minimize transfer. Exam tip. Use filter equals blob. None when full history is required, but historical file contents can be fetched on demand. You have completed part 1 of the AZ-400 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.